Tony Kemp, thank you for joining me on NRL Fans WA.
Yeah, man. No, it's a absolute pleasure, man, to be talking to rugby league people. Geez, that far away in Perth. What a spot. Love that spot.
Yeah, it's a beautiful spot over here, mate. I mean, I've lived in New Zealand as well, so yeah, I've got ties to New Zealand and Australia and Perth especially. But yeah, it's cool to have someone that's living over in New Zealand doing the radio stuff and actually on the ground when it comes to New Zealand Rugby League, especially with the talk of that 18th team. I know you were saying just off air before that, you know, you want that second team in Auckland. Excuse me, but I've heard you also talk about before that you probably don't think that New Zealand's ready for it just yet.
Yeah, it's a tough one. Look, I don't think the competition's ready for it just yet. To be honest, I think you know, if you have a look at the competition, especially over the last month, and how teams have been tailed up by 60 points, it doesn't make good viewing. Even though the competition, I think, since pre-COVID, is probably the best it's been in the last 3 or 4 years. Adding that 17th team is once you go into Origin, once you go through injuries, you know, that's what people aren't talking about at the moment. You know, those teams that are down the bottom that are struggling, they tend to get plenty of points put past them, the teams that are at full strength. So we even saw that last night, the Warriors up against the Parramatta side, no Gutherson, you know, no Mitchell Moses, no Campbell, Gillard, and you know, the Warriors in the end just put an absolute clinic on. So although I like to see the game expand and become a true national rugby league competition, you know, I do want it to come down in New Zealand. I think we can sustain that. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But, you know, I just think at the moment it needs to just beat itself a little bit more, the 17 teams, so that we can just get across that, I guess, that development model, because that's what's really not pulling through. We're not pulling through the type of player, the quality of player that's needed at that top level.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you know, they need to wait a few more years before they bring in the 18th team. I know it's a bit of a pain in the ass, and especially with the you know, Foxtel and Channel 9 with the rights, and you know, it does add an extra game. But the talent that's around, you know, we're seeing the depth that, you know, the Dolphins have got since they've had struggles with injuries, suspensions and everything else. They started to fall away. You know, they were great at the start of the year, but a lot of the signings that they got as well were guys probably at the latter end of their career. You know, they couldn't get that marquee player. You know, it's one of those things. I think that the NRL does need to wait, you know, a few more years. I think, you know, even 4 years at the most, 5, you know, just to get enough people, because we're still coming through that tail end of the COVID period where, you know, these young kids didn't have any games playing, you know, so they're starting to get back into playing full-time rugby league in the New South Wales Cup, the QRL, all that sort of stuff. So I think they need to wait, develop these players a bit more before they can bring in that 18th team.
Yeah, and that's, you know, Jamie, that's really the key, isn't it, to having a successful franchise, is you're looking at your development models. You know, if you look at Newcastle, which is a team, you know, I came in with Newcastle in 1988. That was the inaugural year that Newcastle came into the competition. Newcastle's a lot like New Zealand and Perth. You know, it's one team, one town, so to speak, but one massive catchment area. And if you have a look at what Newcastle have done, they've won 2 premierships in that time, but should have won a hell of a lot more. And all down to a lot of their players in their junior catchment area going to other clubs. You look at Payne Haas, he's a Newcastle boy. Tavita Pangai, he's a Newcastle boy. I could name a whole team. You know, Brett Camorley back in the day had to go and find himself another spot down in Melbourne. You know, it's how do you capture this development model, and how do you actually make it work so that when you are bringing through players, that the first team that they want to play for is their team, which is actually their hometown. You know, in New Zealand, we have this massive problem of retaining talent. You know, people talk about 500 kids being through the NRL competition. Well, the actual figure is that every year between 500 and 1,000 kids export to New Zealand, to Australia. And they either go into school systems, and a lot of it just isn't about rugby league. Their parents migrate there for employment. A hell of a lot of them go over to Western Australia to work. And then they find themselves in school systems. And of course, the development system is a hell of a lot better over there because we don't get the support for rugby league in this country. So just on the numbers alone, we know that if we can create a better development model here in New Zealand, those or some of those 500 kids might decide to stay here and be developed to play in an NRL competition. And that's really, the $1 million question when the NRL are looking at your area, like I just mentioned about Newcastle, is that can they sustain a development model that, I guess, as you've seen with the Dolphins, as you've said, can actually compete when the going gets tough. And see, Newcastle at the moment are pretty broken in their development model. I was only over there a couple of weeks ago talking to them about that. And they're actually putting a lot of emphasis is going back out into the regions and that Newcastle catchment area and getting them to try and pick Newcastle as their number one club. Because as you know, in New Zealand, the 17 franchises are over here picking the pieces out development kids. And if you look at all of those teams, a lot of the kids now that are playing in the NRL, most of their marquee players are Kiwis. Now, when I was playing there in Newcastle, there's something like 2% of Kiwis were in that competition. Now it's up close to, I think it's 50% or 54% of NRL players of Pacific or Polynesian descendants are from New Zealand. And that just goes to talk to you what sort of development this country could have if we could keep them here.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I've seen it firsthand, the amount of talent that the Polynesians and all that sort of stuff we've got, the Pacific Islands, living over there. Because I lived in Rotorua. So
Vegas.
I found like living over there though, that the rugby league game wasn't as popular. If you're outside of Auckland, Hamilton, it's not as popular. People, the kids, the parents, they follow it to a certain extent when the rugby union's not on, but they don't really, it's sort of like a second, third sort of sport for them, And I was talking to Richard Barnett about it the other day, and he was saying, basketball, even volleyball, and all those sort of sports are starting to come up where rugby union and rugby league are starting to drop off with the participations.
Yeah, it's a funny landscape, like you've got to be really careful how you answer that question, because if you're answering that question in around rugby league and the profile that it has in New Zealand, it's actually leading the sport landscape at the moment. So everyone is switching on to watch the NRL. You've got Wayne Smith, who's the current director of the All Blacks, high performance director of the All Blacks, who took the women to the World Cup last year, saying that he switches on the NRL because the rugby union's boring. You had Steve Hansen coming out only last week when he was on our radio station saying, like they're just common sense. Volandis has done such a good job at promoting the NRL, and it's a much better sport to watch. So if you're profiling the sport, rugby league in this country is probably the most watched sport week in, week out. And that's a real accolade for the sport, because, in New Zealand, that the All Blacks run through the fabric of what this country is. Everyone wants to be an All Black when they grow up. Every school plays rugby union. The kids on a Saturday morning, as you know, you went to Rotorua, and parents, just love that Saturday morning feel of, oh, one day my kid's going to be an All Black. But then what you have is this crossover over the last sort of 10 to 20 years of mums and dads not wanting their kids to be in a collision sport, because that's the difference between when you're talking basketball, all those other games, soccer. It's a less collided sport that they want to be invested in. And basketball in this country at the moment is the fastest growing sport, alongside surfing, alongside golf. All pretty well somewhere where you don't put your head into those dark places. So it is a real funny one, Jamie, because yesterday I was talking to a mate of mine down in Christchurch, and people in New Zealand think that rugby league in this country's dead and buried, but it's not. Rugby league in this country is actually still played in and around the provinces. It's played heavily in the big provinces, like you said, Auckland, Christchurch, Wellington. You've got the Waikato, Hamilton. But have a listen to this. In the Wellington comp, Hornby yesterday won the competition down there. They fielded 5 senior sides, including masters, 2 girls sides, plus 18s boys, and 2 16-year-old sides in the same grade, and a host of junior teams.
Yeah,
So
right.
that's one club, you know what I mean? And I think on the back of, if you go back to that question around profile, it's a real opportunity, and I've been saying this on our breakfast show, like it's a real opportunity that rugby league has now, is to convert that profile that rugby league is riding on the crest of a wave into actual numbers back into the sport. The only issue that we've got is that we've got a bit of a basket case for a head governing body here that hasn't been operating that well and doesn't really invest well into our grassroots sport. And that's the sad reality of it. You know, we still got people out there in the community like yourself, is one of the reasons why I always like talking to our community, that are basically keeping the sport breathing. But if we had some real good leadership at the top, especially here in New Zealand, we could actually go to a different level.
Yeah, I remember hearing you talk about that on your radio station, SENZ, that, you know, they need to develop more, put more money into the grassroots. You know, I remember you talking about a fair bit, you know, even, like, what was it? I lost what I was going to say about that.
I'll tell you, well, I know exactly what you're talking about. So I'll just put it to you in dollar terms. Okay. So they call them NSOs in this country. They're called National Sporting Officers. So you've got the New Zealand Rugby, New Zealand Rugby League, New Zealand Basketball, the New Zealand Soccer, you know what I mean? So they're called NSOs in this country. Every NSO, they basically a business. They run themselves as a business. They develop the game of rugby league or sport in this country right through from grassroots to high performance. So we'll park that and we'll just talk about rugby league. In the last 10 years, and I'll round the numbers off, in the last 10 years, New Zealand Rugby League has bought into their head office in the vicinity of anywhere between $6 and $10 million. So if you take that annually and convert that times 10, that's between $60 and $100 million. Yeah. Now we're talking significant funds when you look at it like that. Yet out in our districts, out in our clubland, none of them are getting any money. So none of them are getting any money. That's the question. Where is the money actually going? It's being led by Sport New Zealand, who are sanctioning all this funding to go into these national sporting offices. And if you look at the salaries of the people that are actually working at the offices, it's just a really sad case of money going into the wrong places when we've got people out in clubland, out in our districts, which is, you know, like Fremantle. We've got a place down in Taranaki called Taranaki, down in the North Island called Taranaki, and they just absolutely get bugger all cash injection into to help with grassroots. So on the bigger scale, when you're talking about it, especially when you're talking about it over time, then you start to wonder, well, what the hell's going on? And that's the major issue in our country. You know, there's very few people like me that will talk about these type of going on. So, you know, you tend to get blacklisted because of it, because people don't actually want you to talk about it. But it has to be known that, you know, if you're using money in the wrong places, and we've got people, and look, I've chaired my club at Waitara, I've sat in my district and chaired my district, I've chaired my zone, I've worked for the New Zealand Rugby League, I've sat through all of these operational positions, and one thing I can honestly say with my hand on my heart is that it's severely broken in this country. And the problem with it being broken is that you still get the $6 to $10 million coming in every year, and it's still not going into the right areas. And until we sort that out, our game will always be behind the eight ball.
I can also attest to this, mate, that WA Rugby League is in a very similar position. You know, our local clubs, there is some clubs that are fortunate and have got decent facilities, all that sort of stuff. But there's a lot of, I was with another club last year, which I was the vice president of. We'd only been around for 3 years at the time, and just no money had come into it, you know, from the NRL WA. And, you know, we know that they get the money from the NRL. You know, they filter it down to the local competitions, but no money was coming into the other clubs. Yeah, a lot of the clubs run on still volunteers and sponsorships, you know, and then the money is just not coming in. Therefore, the players, the kids at the clubs are suffering. You know,
Yeah.
I know. I was talking to one of the guys at NRLWA, not last year, year before. Outside of New South Wales and Queensland, WA had the highest junior participation in the country.
Yeah.
And they don't want to put the money into it to fund these kids, to get them into the right places, to get them into the right, thinking, so they keep them in the sport. We are losing a lot of kids to AFL, to rugby union, all these sort of sports, because it's not just because of the contact and all that sort of stuff, which that is, but it's because there's no pathway here. We don't have our West Coast Pirates in the under 18s comp. We used to have that before COVID, and they haven't brought it back outside of COVID. So these kids are sitting there going, well, the only way for us to get into the NRL is they have to move over east, and their parents are like, well, there's no money over there. We're going to stay here. We're working in the mines or whatever it is. And you go over Sydney or wherever it is, and it's, I guess, more heavily populated, especially with the Polynesians and all that sort of stuff. I guess, these other kids that are Australian and white and all that sort of stuff aren't getting that look in, because these Polynesian kids are bigger, stronger, faster, and they're dominating the game more. So, the parents are just like, no, we'll stay here and you can go play another sport.
And it's the maturation of the Polynesians is a lot earlier than a white Australian boy. Like, so at 15, they're bigger, they're stronger, they're faster, and you've got to give them time to develop. And it's what you're talking about, Jamie, is around that development model that needs to be in place. And what you talk around with the NRL WA, that is your governing body, is really similar to that NSO model that we have here in the country, where sporadic competitions, development models, and Andrew Abdo has actually said this to me, where they realise how big a recruitment ground New Zealand is for the whole of the NRL. So, one of the issues you've got is that you get people that go into these positions and they get paid really well from the NRL funding. So any type of funding that comes in, one of the biggest detriments to the game is that people get stars in their eyes and dollar signs and tend to take bigger salaries and where the money's meant to be going, which is back into the development of the game. And like Western Australia, New Zealand is run solely by volunteers out there in grassroots football. People putting their hands in their pocket to get their own money out. We can't even afford a bus to play club competitions, to get our teams on buses to get to other clubs. And it's a real sad state of affairs. And, one of the things that we're actively trying to do down here is get the people, I call them the owners of the game. So you've got the volunteers who are the clubs that run the clubs. Well, they are actually why the NRL put the investment into the game. And you have every right to vote those people out that are sitting in there taking the money and not doing what's right with it. So a lot of people don't understand how that governance model works. So my suggestion would be for the Western Australian clubs is to get together and start meeting on your own. You're not, if you're not getting what you need from NRL WA, then you need to put people in there that are listening to you. It's a real simple effect. And if you're strong enough, then and they won't listen, and go past them and go directly to the NRL.
Yeah, no, that's a beautiful way to look at it, mate. I guess we'll jump off that subject now. I guess we could talk about that all day. One of those things that we're both very passionate about.
It's passionate. It is. I'm very passionate about it.
Yeah. But yeah, we'll jump into your career, and then there's some other questions that I'll jump into a bit later. But as you mentioned before, mate, your career, you started in '88 at the Knights. You play 87 games for them, then you move over to Castleford over in the UK. You come back to Australia for one season with the Crushers, and then back to England and play for Leeds and Wakefield, which you end up going on to coach before coming back to New Zealand, or going back to New Zealand and you coach the Warriors. When you look back on your career, mate, your playing career, your coaching career, is there anything that you've taken out of that professional career that's made you into the better person, husband, father that you are today?
Well, yeah, look, I suppose you've got to go back even further than that, Jamie. I came from a small rural town called Waitara, which is on the west coast of the North Island in a province called Taranaki. There's a lot of our Waitara people that live in Western Australia. They're up there working in the mines, you know, and a lot of them play rugby league, so they'll be watching this podcast. But the only way I describe that town is that back in those days when we grew up, we fought for oxygen. So anything that you wanted to do, and you were so competitive, you wanted to give the best as an athlete or anything that you did. And we had so many talented people in that town. You know, growing up, we ended up with a New Zealand surf champion. In my club, we had the New Zealand Rugby League coach, myself and Davey Watson were in the team. So we had 3 Kiwis. Our rugby club, you know, Colin Cooper was a Māori All Black with Charlie McAllister, who's Luke McAllister's father. Luke McAllister's grandfather rode for New Zealand. Then we've had New Zealand netball ferns, and we've got doctors, lawyers, and the list of people in this small town with only a population of 6,000 was absolutely phenomenal. And I always say pro rata, Waitara would have been producing on average a ton more athletes than anywhere else around New Zealand. So growing up in that type of environment, you know, making a decision that, you know, one day I wanted to be in the NRL and play in the NRL was actually quite an easy decision to make, because if you wanted to then go from there into playing against the best in the world, well, you had a really good grounding. And so making that next step wasn't that hard. And you know, like you said, I signed for Newcastle. I'd actually been to England and played for Doncaster before that to get a bit of experience, and you know, made every New Zealand grade team that had been around from 15s to 17s, junior Kiwis, and then made my debut with the Kiwis in '89, and then I went on this journey with rugby league, and I probably learned more in my rugby league career than I did in my whole time in my 15 years at school, because you can leave school when you're 15, you see. So we had a place down in Waitara. We had a university in Waitara. It was called the Freezing Works, which all these boys from Waitara would laugh, because a lot of them over there had actually worked with me in that Freezing Works. And I called it the University of Waitara because you learnt more there in the 2 seasons that I worked there than I did in the 15 years at school. And the same thing happened when I went into my rugby league career. You know, it's I guess the easiest way to explain it, when I lost my job as the Warriors coach in 2006, and I sat in my car and I was sitting up on one of the hills in Auckland going, well, you know, you've got to front the media here. You know, you just didn't get through the year. Your time's done. How are you going to be remembered? And I remember sitting in my car and I'd reflected on how other people had handled that time. And I'd seen blokes throw their toys out of the cot, you know, guys not showing up to the media. They're really disgruntled. And that's the first thing that resonated with me, was like, don't be that guy. You know what I mean? And then my head was saying, well, why wouldn't you be that guy? And then that was what I said to the media. So when they asked me, oh, you must be disappointed that you're not the coach next year for the Warriors. And I said, you know, I've got rugby league to thank for everything. You know, I've had a wonderful football career. Yes, I've had a tough year this year coaching the Warriors, but, you know, we took them to a grand final. We're 1 game away from it in 2004. 3, and then, you know, well, who am I to say that, you know, I'm really disappointed in the game of rugby league and that I couldn't do it? And you know, for me, it's just sort of made me realise, and this is why I work in the community now, Jamie, is that where you started to where you get to, you might see people change, but it's really important that you always remember where you came from. And I can honestly say, like, when I go back down to my club and I see our kids playing on those football field, I can see myself in those kids, and I can see their potential, and I can see the whānau's potential that are on the sidelines just barracking for them all day. And just know that, you know, if they've got some vision and they want to really use rugby league as a conduit for a better life, then you can actually achieve it, you know, because I'm living proof of that. So, yeah, mate, look, has it made me a better person? Oh, hell yeah, 100%. You know, would I do some things differently? Hell yeah. You know, he's a different Tony Kemp at 20 than there is at 56. You know what I mean? So, but but would I change my sport? Not a chance. Like, this sport it was suited for me. You know, it was skillful. You know, if you love collision as a male, it gave you that and more. If you wanted a challenge, well, you know, running up against Mel Meninga and Wally Lewis in a test match, I couldn't have got any better than that. And then I've got these guys that grew up the same way as me from all around the country who are still today some of my best mates. So, and I'm still in the sport, you know, and I don't think I'll ever step out of it. That's why when you want people want to talk to me about rugby league, they can see the amount of passion oozing out of me, because all I want for our sport is the best thing. And you know, we went from an amateur sport in this country back in the early 80s to, you know, we're now sort of, I call it, we're on life support as a sport in New Zealand. But man, the potential for rugby league in this country has just never been realised. And I hope one day in my time that I've made some little benefit to us actually trying to realise that.
Yeah, absolutely, mate. You know, and I think, you know, it's a testament to how much passion that you got, that you're still involved. Yeah, every time I hear you, because obviously I don't listen to the radio or SENZ over here, can't hear it. But I watch a lot of your stuff on social media.
Download the app, mate. Download the
app.
I'm
going to have to.
Download the SEN app, and then you can just click on it. You'll listen to me and Izzy every morning, mate. It's a hell of a lot better than the Aussie one.
Well, because I watch a lot of your social media stuff, you know, through SENZ, you know, because I follow the page on there. And, you know, I love listening to, you know, you and Izzy talk about the league, and you can hear the passion. Like, even though Izzy Dag was a union player, he's still got the passion. He knows a lot about the game of rugby league, you know, and your passion just oozes out when you're talking about it. So,
well, it's funny that, Jamie, you know, like a lot of the kids in New Zealand, they play both rugby and league, you know, like, and we just all want, you know, back in my day, we grew up, we played Saturday, Sunday, you know, so you played rugby for your first 15 on a Saturday, and you went and had a scrap on a Sunday in a rugby league game with your mates in the townies, you know what I mean? It was just the way that you rolled back then. And, you know, Mills Muliaina, who was Izzy's protege, you know, and I guess took over that position from him in the All Blacks. He played for down in Invercargill for the league club down there. You know, you'll be amazed at how many of the All Blacks actually played rugby league. And of course, when I was talking about profiling the game at the moment, like, they'll tell you that they'd much rather watch a game of rugby league. You know, Mills, you know, contacted me a couple of weeks ago for the second state of origin. He forgot to get his origin tickets. So I just went through my contacts and said, yeah, man, I'll get you a couple, and got him a couple of tickets to the origin. And then he puts up this post on social media, and he's got Willie Mason and you know, I forgot who the other, I think it was Justin Horo, standing around him, you know, at the Queensland Origin game. And, you know, I think when you're talking sport, and then the other thing about that too is we all come from the same background, you know, like we're, you know, a lot of us are from the other side of the railway tracks. You know, we come from state homes, we're whāngai whānau. You know, we come from a tough upbringing. Our parents are factory workers. You know, my dad was a freezing worker. My mum worked in a chicken factory. And like I said, the kids, they fought for oxygen when it was on the sport field, mate. You know, you wanted to. Peak teams used to hate playing us because they just knew they were going to get a hiding if they didn't show up. So I just think that's sort of what makes Kiwi kids want to be such good sportsmen. And Izzy, mate, when he talks rugby league, like, mate, we're talking about the All Black test this morning, you know what I mean? And I'm going, I thought Geordie Barrett was player of the day. And he goes, nah, D-Mac, man, he ran a clinic, you know. But we can talk to each other like that because we've been there, and we can see the effort that people are putting in. So, yeah, man, like I said, download the app. If you want to hear more of that, then it's pretty easy. Download the app. You can listen to us every morning.
Yeah, definitely, mate. I'll be definitely looking into that, mate. So, because I work FIFO, so I work out in the mines myself. So, it's a bit hard to listen to the radio at times because I don't get reception out there at times. But yeah, I'll download it and listen to it later. But yeah, when you're in your career, mate, you know, you're saying you started over in Doncaster in England, after leaving New Zealand to go to England, going back to Australia, back to England, back to Australia, back to England, back, you know, how was that for you and the family, like trying to move around all the time, you know, I guess being unsettled because it wasn't a long time between teams at times?
Yeah, mate, it is tough. Like they got in the NRL, they've got what they call family homes. Where they put a family in to look after the young boys. I was the original. I was the number one kid that went into Newcastle's house because I was still only 19. So when they put their clubhouse together, the woman there, her name was Carol. She was the mother who lived locally. She'd come in and cook for us and clean, and we'd have a room. And Mark Mulligan, Mark Glanville's brother Scott Glanville was another guy in there. It's about 4 or 5 of us that stayed in this one house, mate. It's really tough. I used to cry into my pillow at night because I couldn't jump in a car and go home and see my parents, or it was just about training and eating and getting ready to try and crack it in the first grade. So, mate, it ain't easy when you're taking it through those transitions. But the one thing that I was driven by was, I knew that rugby league could sort of give me a different sort of life than the one that I was used to. It was an opportunity to sort of break a cycle that I was not happy with, being brought up, like we lived a pretty tough life. My dad was a strong hand of the town, he love and hate to me were the same things, he ruled with an iron fist, and we bore a lot of that. And I saw rugby league as a conduit to sort of get me out of that life, mate. One of the biggest problems I had, I kept getting sent off because I was, just wanted to scrap all the time. So it was really tough, but it was, the opportunities when they come up, you sort of, as a sports person, for me, it was always about where I was going, not where I'd come from. And when the opportunity came from going, from Newcastle, I was there for 5-6 years, and then I went over to Castleford. I dreamed of playing at Castleford because when I was at Doncaster, I went and watched Castleford when Bobby Lidner was playing for them, and at the Jungle, you know what I mean? They called it, and I remember standing in the crowd with the supporters going, "Man, I want to be out on that pitch. Like, how good would it be listening to this?" And 5-6 years later, I'm actually out there running around with Richie Blackmore and Tawa Nico in that beautiful Castleford jumper. So you sort of go with those opportunities, and then opportunities lead into other opportunities with going up to the Crushers and playing with Trevor Gilmeister and Dale Shearer, and then heading back, even the Warriors coaching gig was, talking to Matthew Ridge when he helped put that deal together with him, Mark Hodgson and Eric Watson to buy the club. And I'm the first Kiwi thought about to come in and help coach the club. And, those were sort of, if you didn't have that mindset about taking that next step and doing what was best for your family, you can see why people get stuck. But I've never been like that, mate. I've always been, glass half full. If there's something that I think is going to benefit everybody, not just myself, then you sort of you take that next move. And you got to remember, mate, I left school when I was 15, so I can talk about getting the cane and just being an absolute nightmare at school because I had such a short attention span. But the one thing I remember a teacher at school saying, Kemp, you're a dreamer. Like he'd say, "What are you going to be?" And I said, "I'm going to actually play in the NRL." And he goes, "Mate, you're a dreamer." You know what I mean? And I actually went back years later and thanked that teacher for saying that because it just drove me even more to prove him wrong. And that's what you do. Like if you've got that desire and that drive, mate, it's not that hard traveling around the world because there are benefits. You know what I mean? Like if you're in England, well, you're in Europe. So going to places that people only dream of going, and rugby league's paying you to get there and stuff like that. Well, those are some of the benefits. But body wise, it's probably the biggest challenge is that all these years later, now I'm sort of paying the price, but bashed up. But it's still moving, and of course, if things happen, then I'm moving with them. I'd set a goal to be I wanted my own breakfast show. I said that to my partner. Many years ago, she said, "What would you like to do?" And I said, "Well, I'd actually like my own breakfast show." And it's sort of that goal setting and that practice sort of since when I was 15 all the way through to my 50s. That was, she often says to me, she said, "You said you're going to get a breakfast show." And you're like, "Yeah, I did it, didn't I?" Like your mindset's always about what's going to happen next and what you need to do to get there. And I talk to a lot of kids about that these days, the power of the mind and the power of goal setting, just always believe that if that's something that you want, mate, and it's attainable. You can go and get it. And it's, you know, it's all, you know, I sometimes got to pinch myself today to go, man, this 15-year-old kid to where he is today is in two totally different worlds. But you know, it's because of rugby league. That's what I always say, you know, like rugby league has been so good to me.
Yeah. Well, that was, you know, speaking about the, you know, talking to the kids and stuff like that, that was going to be one of my questions, you know, some advice that these kids, I mean, I've got 10 kids that live in my household.
Good on you, man.
Yeah, married to a Māori, so it's going to be a lot of kids.
Oh, of course. Whangaiden. That's exactly
That's
right, you know.
But yeah, like what's some advice that you give them, you know, whether it be a sporting career or, you know, they want to be, I don't know, a doctor or a mechanic or something like that. What's some advice? You know, you said that, you know, you follow your goals and stuff like that, had those set goals. But what else do you think, yeah, advice that they need?
Well, the you know, there's a you know, it's a lot wiser these days talking about it than just going out and saying, you know, set goals and you'll achieve them if you believe in them. You know, I think the first thing is to ko. You know, there's a Māori saying is ko, like, who am I? And I think before you can do anything, you really need to know who you are and to sit comfortable in your own space. And there's a massive issue with tall poppy syndrome, especially today with our kids on social media, that if you're doing something, you know, and you know, you're not humble, you're not celebrating you're celebrating your success too much, then they're going to knock the stool that you're standing on from underneath your feet. And I'm a serious believer that that's wrong. You know what I mean? So people that say, oh, you know, that's Tony Kemp, and look at him, he's got a big head, and you know, look who he thinks he is. The first thing I say, well, you know, do you know me? Because I know who I am. But the most important thing is, do you know where I've come from? You know, because a lot of people wouldn't say that if they actually knew where I came from. And there'll be a lot of people from Waitara here that know exactly who I am and exactly what I came from. And they go, I can tell you where that boy came from. You know what I mean? So I think the first thing, Jamie, is to know who you are. And then if you know who you are and you're comfortable with the skin that the skin that you're set in, is then start moving forward, you know. And if you can move forward and you set yourself some goals and you have a vision, one of the things that I tell the kids these days is to create a vision board, you know. So behind me, you can see the picture of the wings up there. That's of a very nice artist that we like, you know. But on a vision board, you would start to map out your future. So, you know, get some magazines and start cutting out the things that you see your future looking like. So you might say, you know, we lived in a state home. You know, what I wanted was a 2-story home. I wanted it to be freehold. You know, I didn't want the state to own it. I wanted to actually pay for it myself. So I had, you know, 2 stories was in my head because I went to one of my mates' house. He had a 2-story house. I thought it was cool being up on top of the roof. Wouldn't build one today, but so you cut that picture out and you put that on your storyboard, and then you might say, well, you know, man, one day I want to drive a nice Holden or a nice Bentley or whatever, and you cut that picture out, you know, and you put that up there, and you say, oh, you know, I love surfing, and then you cut out a big wave in Chopu, you know what I mean? And you just then you start, you know, want a wife with kids, and you put a picture of a family up there, and, you know, I want a degree, and you put that picture up there, and all of a sudden you have this vision and the storyboard that you're looking at every single day. And what I realized through the years was that, you know, I remember this one, I had a picture of a car. It was a Carmen Gear. I'd never fit a Carmen Gear these days. But back in those days, I would have slid in there quite nicely. But before the Carmen Gear, it was mate, of all cars, it was a Lada. I don't know if you know what a Lada is, but it's a Russian taxi. Like, I don't know what the hell I was thinking about. I must have thought they were cool. So I went from a Lada to a Carmen Gear, and then I went to like an Audi, and these pictures would always be changed. And that's the thing with a storyboard, is that as time goes and your vision and your focus is so strong, your storyboard actually becomes reality, and then you've got to start pulling them down and replacing them. You know. And in a sense, for young people to learn that at such an early age, it is actually a physical way of doing your goal setting.
Yeah.
And most kids I talk to these days, when they say, well, is there one thing that you can leave with? I say, yeah, create a vision board. Like put it up in your house and make sure you look at it every day. My one's still upstairs. It's every night I walk up to my bedroom, and before I get to the top, it's right there in front of me. And
nice.
as I look at it, I'll go, yeah, I need to put another picture up on here because this is what I'm thinking about at the moment. So that's some of the advice, like, first of all, know who you are. The other main thing is don't be afraid to celebrate your successes. Like the people that knock you down, they're currently full with they're probably full with what they call short emotions, which is jealousy, anger, hatred. And celebrate your successes, and don't be afraid to do that. Because if you know who you are and you know where you come from, those people probably don't know you. And as long as you're happy with that, who cares what other people think? Because your focus is so strong, then you just go back to what I'm talking about, and that's vision. So I hope that helps people.
No, absolutely, mate. You're the second person to say that as well. Like I said, I'm talking to Richie Barnett the other day. He said the exact same thing with the storyboard. And that's how he did it. He was saying he had the rugby league magazine, and he tore down pictures and put it all up on his wall, all his favorite players, all that sort of stuff. So
so
it's a great way.
All of our rooms look the same, mate. Like I had Eric Graith, big picture of, they used to call it the Rugby League Week, and Eric Graith, he was my idol. Big picture up by my bed, and mold my game around him, and watch how he played and stuff like that. So yeah, man, that's not a storyboard. That's a vision that we didn't even know that we were doing it. But now as older men, I remember one of my mates' fathers saying to me, mate, if I had your body and my head on your shoulders, we'd be an All Black. Like that. I never got it. I never got it until later on when I went, he was just, the wise head was talking, you know what I mean? And you sort of learn that as you get older. But yeah, if I can impart some of that knowledge to a young guy that has that desire and that passion to really be successful, like, it can be anything, man. If you want to be something, like, I could point out 10 people off the top of my just my thoughts at the moment, say, well, man, this guy's come from this and this is what he is today, so just believe he can do it.
Yeah, absolutely. That's beautiful, mate. And like I said, you're not the first person to use that storyboard as a thing, so that's pretty cool. Like, and the more people I talk to, I get these different answers and different things, and because my partner, my missus, she watches these with me, and then, like, we watch it back after I have the chat, and we're like, oh, we can do that with our kids, or we can do that with our lives, and it's stuff that we take from other people, and it's so cool to take from other people. So yeah,
it's awesome.
When you were playing, mate, you finished your career at Wakefield, and then you go on to coach them. How was that transition? Especially with you and the boys that you just played with.
Oh, there's a couple of points in that, Jamie. Like, the first thing is that being in the position that I was on the football field, I was always the ear of the coach. So a lot of the structure and the systems were coming through me as a 5'8", or as a leader on a defensive edge, or main attacker. So you had the ear of the coach all the time. So I really enjoyed some of the coaches and their philosophies, and how they were bringing that to a team and creating team environment and stuff like that. And I fell into coaching because I'd had a real bad run of broken arms at Leeds. I broke my arm real high up by my elbow, and they'd inserted a plate, and they didn't get the screws in properly. I had to get it taken out, then it broke again, and I was having this really bad run, and the CEO at the club at Leeds at the time said, "Oh, mate, we need some of that money back." He sat me down in a meeting, and I'd retired from the New Zealand team there, so I was pretty well up on how to do things. And I said, "Well, you're not getting any money back. It's not my fault. My arm's broken. I was actually out there playing for your club. But I'll tell you what I will do, because I wasn't one to sit on my hands. I said, I'll coach your second team. So I'll come and coach your second team for you." And he sort of went, "Oh, yeah, okay, well, that's actually a good trade-off, like we don't have to pay for another coach. We'll just use you because you had a broken arm." And actually did win all right. We won the second grade competition over in England, and Kevin Sinfield, who's doing all them marathons at the moment for Rod Burrow, he just reminded me the other day when I had on the radio, he goes, "Oh, Kemp, remember you gave me my debut, mate?" Like that. And I was like, mate, I actually had forgotten. So, you know, that's sort of how I got into coaching. So I sort of fell into it. And the following year, Wakefield had come into Super League and they were looking for a captain, but who could actually help their new coach. And I thought, yeah, well, this is a bit more of a challenge, you know, because I was just about ready to retire. So I ended up going to Wakefield. I was captain assistant coach. I was helping the coach out. I mean, I remember saying, "Oh, we're going to defend like this," you know, and I'd known quite a lot about defensive structures. And he said, "Right, this is how our defensive structure is going to come on." And I sort of looked at him and went, "Mate, what do you think we're back in the 70s or something, man? We're going to get towed up." And I said, "We're not defending like that." I said, "We're getting off our line and we're going to go and get them. And we're going to put them under pressure. We need to take time off their ball players, otherwise we're going to get carved up." And I remember him looking at me going, "Who's the coach here?" You know. But we did that and we stayed up in Super League, you know, and then the following year they offered me the job as captain coach, and you know, on the back of that, you know, the club, we got into a bit of trouble, and they said, "Oh, we want to keep you as a coach." And I didn't like the way they were handling things, especially the players. And I said, "No, I'm out." But I'd like the coaching, and I was actually heading back to Newcastle at the time, and that's when I got the phone call from Ridgie, and you know, I thought to myself, you know, if I want to be a decent coach, I want to actually coach in the NRL, not the Super League, and I want to get a good footing there. And it sort of just worked out, you know. He sort of talked to a friend. They said I did quite a good job up in Super League, and they were looking for an assistant coach, and he offered me the role, and I went in there, and you know, that's how me and Daniel Anderson met. Was for the first time, was, you know, by interview, and you know, the rest is history. We went on that wonderful run through the finals and that, and I ended up with a head coach's job there for a couple of years. And it was a good ride. It was, you know, coaching's not for everyone. I'll say that, but it does give you a really good footing in sort of that high performance arena, you know, which is what I really enjoyed, because I ended up staying in that arena for probably another 10 years in that high performance arena. And like I said, now I'm back in the community arena now, but I've got all that knowledge in and around working through those pathways, and I got to say I enjoyed it. I still enjoy it.
Yeah, no, that's it, mate. You know, and was it 04, 05 that you were at the Warriors as the head coach? You know, after obviously Daniel Anderson had left, you know, and then the Warriors coaches, like, they've had some really good coaches that have taken them to, you know, the grand finals, stuff like that. You know, it's just, I guess, unfortunate the last few years they've had, I guess, unsustained success at the club. You know, where they've been a bit inconsistent. You know, one week they can beat the Storm and the next week they're losing to the Tigers by 50 points. So it's one of those things with the Warriors, I think, that are, you know, the new coach, Andrew Webster's done a really good job with them.
Well, he has, Webby. He's done a very good job with bringing that that culture and reorganising the DNA of the club. You know, like Sean Johnson probably summed it up this week when he got his jersey for his 200 and said, you know, you've made it fun again. And one of the reasons why we went to the grand final in 2002 was because we made it fun again. You know, the boys loved training. They got fit. They got skill to burn. And the competition, they took it on head on. You know what I mean? But yeah, it's, you know, the average coach of the Warriors, because they've had so many, gets less than 2 years in that head coach's position if you were to average it out. And I think to the detriment of that club has been one of their major problems, because every coach brings a different DNA and a different culture, and they haven't been able to settle on it. So sort of like a Melbourne, you know, like, you know what you're getting with Melbourne. They've got their DNA, they've got their culture, and they've taken average players and turned them into great players because of that. And I think Webby's done a good job this year on the back of the COVID situation, where they've had to stay in Australia for 2 years without whānau, and bounced out of it, you know, better than anyone, I think. And I think they're a chance. You know, I think if they can make the four, then, you know, the other teams would be really sort of packing themselves if they're coming up against the Warriors, because like we saw against Parramatta, or like we've seen all year, they can really turn it on offensively when they get it right. So yeah, it's for me. It's not really. It'd be really nice if they can get into the finals this year and they can push for it. But it's really, they've got Roger coming back next year. They've got Andrew Webster really growing as a young coach. And if you look at the history, when they've gone well, like the Daniel Anderson era, then they got rid of Ando when they should have kept that side together. They would have won a grand final. They made it, but they would have made it in 5, 6, and 7. You know what I mean? With the ages of those players. Then the same thing happened with Ivan. They went on that run. They get to the final, then they get rid of Ivan. Well, I hope they've learned. They don't do that to Wayne Bennett when he was at Canberra, when he was at Brisbane. You know what I mean? They don't do that to Bellamy. He's only ever been at Melbourne. So I think the likes of the New Zealand Warriors, one of the I guess the biggest changes they can make is to just give someone the coaching job and let him build it. And if it takes him 5 years to 10 years, mate, we're 20 odd, 25 odd years down the track and we still haven't got one. So just give him the time.
Yeah. I think that he can do it as well. The way he's turned that team around, the club around, it's been like astronomical. Like, I watch all the games, so I didn't get to watch last night's game. But yeah, like, just their season they've turned into a more consistent team. I think that's one of their big things has been their consistency. But mate, they've turned it around. The defense has been really great this year. And I think it's also a testament to the competition of how tight this competition is this year. That basically first down to, was it about 12th, 11th, in contention for even top 4. That's they're only a couple of wins away from being the top of the ladder. So it's amazing how this season has gone, compared to previous years where it's been 2 teams at the top and they're 4 or 5 games clear of everyone else.
Yeah, so we're talking maybe 36 points to be in the 4. You've got 4 games separating 1st and 13th. You're a win away from making it the 8th. You're a win away from being 11th. A loss away from being 11th. It is an artificial ladder because you've got 3 buys this year. You know what I mean? So you can't say, oh no, this is where we're going to end up, because you got last night 5 teams picking up 2 points. And that's because of the addition of the 17th team. So it's really important this year that you win games that you're meant to win. The Warriors are meant to win last night against the depleted Parramatta side with no Mitchell Moses, no Gutherson, as I said. And they went out there and done that. But they should have done that against South Sydney too, who had no Latrell Mitchell and a number of other, both Tuss, their centres pulled out, you know what I mean? So you lose
and
that
also
one. You've got to pick,
in New Zealand.
Yeah, and it being in New Zealand in front of 22,000 people. So you've got to, if you lose that one, then you've got to pick up another one, which is Cronulla or Canberra at home in the next couple of weeks. They don't want to be dropping those 2. So it is, mate. It's sort of, people can sort of feel it. They're like, some people are too scared to talk about it. Others are like, don't put the jubies on us. Kemp, be quiet. What do you say that? But the reality of it is, if you invested in and you're analysing it all the time, and I've said this a month ago before they came back out of the bye to play Brisbane, you had to seriously think if they could, and of course you look at the schedule and you go, if they can get through these 3 wins before the next bye, you've got to consider them being a top 4. And then they lose last week, you go, man, they got to win this one now is a dead set. If they want to stay in that 4 contention, they have to win it. You know what I mean? And I was saying to Sammy Hewitt, who calls the game with me last night, that you just have different mindsets, like getting outside, and this is where the weaker teams will drop off as we run in through the next 9 games into the semis, is that teams that have to battle to make the 8, their mindsets are going to change, which means their game will change. Those teams that are battling to get into the 4, their mindsets will change because they'll go, man, we've got to get this done. You know what I mean? So there's a lot to play out, Jamie, over the next 9 weeks. I still believe if they can get these 2 games going into the bye, I think they'll only lose 1 of the next 5 going home. So I think they're a dead set chance of making the 4, but they've got to win the next 2.
Yeah, definitely. Who would be your pick this year for your if you were to pick two grand final teams? Going off current form, obviously at the moment, who do you think?
Oh, look, I've thought Souths are the best defensive side all year. I think they, when they've got Latrell Mitchell, when they've got their full team, they're tough, and they showed us that last week when they came to the Warriors in front of 22,000 people with a number of players out and really dug in. They'd had a horror month, just letting in 30 points each game, and they're down on their I guess their emotion, but they lifted so well for the Warriors game and got that one which no one had picked them to win. And you just can't go away from Penrith. I think Penrith, just with they've been there, they've got two in the bag, and through this Origin period, no Nathan Cleary, a number of NRL players missing, and yet their team, the players that go in there, their depth is just phenomenal, and go out and consistently win games. So, it's a usual suspects, mate. Melbourne, you know that they're going to be thereabouts. But I think the fourth position, so if you go Melbourne, South, and then of course Penrith, everyone's talking Kemp, Brisbane. Hang on, I think they're sort of a bit sketchy. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But you've got the Warriors just sitting there in that fifth spot, along with another. Canberra, Ricky gets them up all the time, and a few other sides just hanging around. I think that fourth spot is the one where you don't really, is the unknown. And if we slide in there with the Warriors at fourth spot, I know that a Penrith, South, and a Melbourne will be, well, you know what they did to Melbourne when one played 8 down there.
Yeah.
That they can go against Penrith. We took on a Penrith when me and Ando had them. We're down by 20 at half time. We come back and beat them. And that's when you've got games like that where the other team's looking over their shoulder. I think they could scare the competition. But that would be my pick. I think Penrith, South, Melbourne, and I'm hoping the Warriors.
Yeah. Well, I think because I'm a Broncos supporter, I think they might probably finish about 5th, depending. Hopefully, they don't get any injuries. The main one for me is Adam Reynolds. If he doesn't get injured, they can be consistent side and probably make the 4. The Warriors are up there. The Raiders are up there for the 4. The Sharks, and then even Parramatta can make the 4.
Well, they're on a roll, Para. Like they're on a roll. They won 5 in a row before they played us last night, but they were shot to pieces with their personnel. But you see,
Dylan Brown hasn't been there for either.
No, Dylan Brown. You see, you just get those sketchy with the competition. You can't be sketchy. That's why when you're looking at the competition, you're looking for teams that can go on a roll. Para's been on a roll. Like how long can they keep it? If you have a talk, to the Warriors when they went. I think they went to the grand final in 2011. They'd won the last 10. They got the grand final. They burnt out.
Yeah.
So it's all about timing, and you've got players coming out of Origin. Who do you rest? Because it's such a long season. And I think, I've said this before, I think this year is probably the first year you could look outside the 8 and go, well, maybe this is the year a team outside the 8 can win it for the first time.
Yeah. Well, the other team is the Cowboys as well.
Mate, they're the absolute smoky. You know what I mean? What they've done in the last couple of weeks has been really scary. Everyone's been waiting for them to come right, and all of a sudden, not just come right, they're smashing people.
Exactly.
But you know what I mean. You've still got a lot of water to go under the bridge with 9 games. And Todd would know that. He'd know that about timing. He wouldn't want to be peaking too early, because there is that type of form too, Jamie. Like a Group 1 race with the horses, is you don't want to get to the finish line too early. And it's the team that manages the best over I think the next 3 weeks. Because I think the last 5 weeks is where teams are actually going to make a real push for it.
Yeah, definitely. Just jump off a bit of footy for the moment, mate. Just on a personal level, mate. Mental health being a big thing these days. We've recently lost Paul Green. Is there a low point in your life that you've gone through? And if so, how did you get through it?
Yeah, mate. Well, like most, I'm not afraid to talk about it. Like a lot of sportsmen, I had serious depression. Um, not too long ago. 6 or 7 years ago, I went through a really low patch around 2011, 12, 13. And it was dark, mate. The black dog was well and truly rearing his head. He's a dark shadow every day of my life there. And I was self-medicating at the time, and just wondering what the hell was going on with my life. And it was at the back of my career where I was so busy, and then I'd stopped and wondered what was coming next. So I'd been that busy that I hadn't had a chance to think about a lot of stuff that went on in my life when I was younger, and it sort of all caught up with me. And it was just, I got to see the right people. They identified the issues, and they, it took us a number of years to get through it. But I guess for me, like Jamie, it's in some small way, all of us sort of carry that little dog around. It's just about when it comes, and how you're able to handle it. And of course, when I grew up, it was just about, like harden up, you get up off the ground, like, come on, man, just, it's big boys don't cry, all this sort of shit, And what I learned was that there is actually help out there that helps you understand what you're going through, and people there that can give you the tools to help you work through it. And I wish I knew that a lot earlier, because I lost a couple of whāngai brothers to suicide. And I know that, one of the first things I thought about when I was coming out of it was, man, if I knew this then, I would have been definitely, imparting on that knowledge. So I think the first thing that, if you're going to talk about mental health, is to always know that there is always help. So there are really, really good organisations and qualified people that can help you. The second thing is, don't be afraid to ask for help, because the stigma around mental health is what holds people back. So, front foot it, ask for help, go and seek the right help. But the most important part is, it just doesn't happen. You have to go to work, So I remember back in the early days when I was dealing with it, was, my house was so dark, it was just even something as simple as pulling the curtains across to let the sun in. Exercise, I didn't want to exercise. It was like, mate, get the vacuum and vacuum the floor. I had to clean this house in the world, mate, because every day I'd get up and vacuum, just to move. And before you know it, it's like, oh shit, I'm going back outside and walk my dog, and and the wheels start turning again. But that's the most important part of it, is that you can seek help, you can get advice, but it's you that actually has to do all the hard work to get to deal with it. So, but yeah, it's interesting times these days. I think it's real prevalent these days. Especially in our young people that are dealing with it. They deal with a hell of a lot more than we did when we were growing up. There was no mobile phone. We never had this thing where, I remember being in England when I was 17, going, man, it'd be nice to talk to my parents and I could see them on a phone. And like, that was a pipe dream, mate. Now look at us, we're Zooming. But what does that mean? That means access to worlds that we would never access. It was no access to us, and when we were that age of our young people. And I think that's a little bit of that grey area that you sort of go, well, maybe they're getting too much information, and maybe it's sort of line in there with that mental health issue. But the main thing is, mate, I always say that you always ask people if they're okay, genuinely, be authentic about it. And most importantly, if you're going to say you're going to help someone, it's not about putting out a tweet. It's actually about phoning them and talking to them. And when you do talk to them and say, look, I think you need to go and seek some help, because the advice and the help is actually really good. And if you're willing to put the work in, mate, he's always there. The black dog, he's always, he's there, but you sort of control the size of the bugger.
Yeah, that's it. Absolutely, mate. And that's exactly what, the advice that people need these days is, get on that front foot, get out, talk about it. And, don't be afraid to talk to your mates. help them out as much as you can, but be genuine about it. If you're going to help someone, be genuine about
Yeah,
it.
authenticity, eh? Like that's
Yeah,
so the main thing is, like a lot of people say, I'm going to help, and they put these posts up as saying, share it with 10 friends. Like,
yeah,
come on, man! Like, pick the phone up.
yeah,
Back in my
exactly.
day, if I had to phone someone back in my day, I had to run 3Ks to find them, and they only lived a K up the road. But you couldn't go around there unless they invited you. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
It's like just a totally different world.
yeah,
And then you didn't have the money to get put in the bloody phone box, so
yeah,
it is such a different world these days.
yeah,
So if you can do that, if you can run 3Ks, like it's, you don't even have to do that these days. Like you can look at each other on a telephone, like just phone them
yeah,
and FaceTime them. How you going, brother? Everything
yeah,
all good?
yeah. No, exactly right, mate. Um, just want to finish off, mate. I know you work for SENZ with your radio show with Israel Dag. What else do you do in your spare time?
Oh man, I do a lot of for over the last sort of 10 years. I've been doing a hell of a lot of community work. I went back down and helped my rugby league club out. We've just done a lot of work to that club and refurnished it. We've got some funding for that. I'm also working on one up in the far north at the moment, helping out our whānau up there. I do. This my main passion at the moment is trying to get the game fixed in this country with some, I guess, the people that actually run the games and out in our areas to actually step back up and have a voice and really say that they need the support that they should be getting anyway.
Yeah,
That takes up quite a bit of time. And then the other part of it, mate, is that it's really at my age now about what the future looks like. So I spend 95% of my time with my family. Talking about what we're doing next, where we're going, what does our life look like in the next 10, 20 years. And yeah, just trying to keep moving is the main thing, Jamie, for me at the moment, because, as I'm getting older, and I always knew the time would come, I've just been through a couple of serious knee operations, one replacement, one was a real bad operation that took a couple of years to sort of get over. And it's about being such a big guy. It's about like making sure that I can maintain my movement,
yeah,
and try and enjoy the rest of my life physically as well as best as I can. So we'll try and lead a pretty simple life. But the other part of that was when you've got a profile and you're doing radio shows and stuff like that, people still want you to do other stuff. It's just like picking the right things to do these days and talking to the right people. But always there, mate, for people like yourself, Jamie, that are in the community that are pushing the barrel of rugby league. Doesn't matter whether you're in Western Australia or in Waitara. People need to hear good messages about our game, because it's predominantly run by volunteers that sometimes need to pick me up. And I know today, being a Sunday, a lot of the whānau will be out there with their kids. I'll be driving them. Where do we get the petrol money to drive them down to the game? And we've got to feed them, and all of that's done on the smell of an oily rag. So if this helps in any way, mate, I'm real happy to be talking about that. But yeah, it's for me at the moment. It's just sort of getting on a bit now, and just what the next 10, 20 years looks like.
yeah, that's it, mate. That's beautiful. Just before we do go, mate, do you have a special message to the people of WA, the volunteers that are helping out here, with the local rugby league clubs?
Yeah, oh look, I've got so many whānau over there in Western Australia. Just first of all, tēnei te mihi ki a koe mo tō kōrero, i te wānei. Thanks a lot for your kōrero today, Jamie. But also to all of our whānau who are sitting over there in Western Australia, a big shout out, especially with my whānau from Waitara, if they're listening. Always good to talk rugby league. And my message to everyone that's there and that are doing the work is that rugby league survives on people like you. It always has. They can strip the money away. You can strip the glamour, the glitz of the NRL away, but at the end of the day, it would not survive if it did not have the volunteers at the grassroots doing what they do week in, week out. And although it's not, I guess, respected or or resourced the way that it should be. Hang tough, and hopefully go back and listen to the front of this message about how you can actually achieve something. Don't be afraid to talk to the right people, and don't be afraid to stand up for what you think is right, because there's not enough of us doing that. And those enough are the people that are the volunteers that are doing it every day, day in, day out. So keep up the good work, Western Australia. And I'm pretty sure you'll get the 19th franchise, because we'll get the 18th one here in New Zealand.
I like it, mate. I like it. Mate, I really do appreciate you giving me your time. Last couple of days we've been trying to get on, and both of us have missed each other.
Worries, David. No worries, man.
If you ever in Perth again, mate, don't hesitate. Give me a call. We'll catch up for a beer or coffee. Come and meet the whano, have a kai.
For sure, mate. I look forward to it. I'll definitely look you up, mate, if I come over there. And yeah, it's such a beautiful place over there. I like that space. I've got, like I said, lots of people over there that I know. So just beware. Just beware.
Yeah. No, that's all right, mate. We'll put the boil up on for you, mate.
Awesome.
Tony Kemp, thank you for joining me on NRL Fans WA.
No worries. Thanks, Jamie. Thank you for having me.
No worries, mate. Thanks, mate. You have a good night.
Okay, mate. See you, Jamie.
See you, mate.